All right, so have you ever snapped a photo and it looks like really good on your phone screen, but then you upload it like to Instagram or whatever, and suddenly it just looks, I don't know.
Totally flat,
Yeah.
dull,
It's
lifeless.
like just dot off, and it's so frustrating.
The classic social media letdown.
Mm.
But, it's not just photos. Ever watch a movie at home and those, dark scenes are just
Mm.
black holes swallowing the actors? You can't even see what's going on.
It's like the worst.
But then you see it in the theater, and it's perfectly clear. You can see all the detail, and you realize, oh, it wasn't supposed to be a shadowy mess.
Right, so what is that? And it made me think, it's kind of like, remember those old, like, really compressed MP3s where the music just sounded thin?
Oh, for sure.
It's like some of the soul is missing.
Yeah. Totally. Like comparing it to seeing a band live, a completely different experience.
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today, with a little help from colorist extraordinaire Frank Glencairn. He's like the expert on this whole inconsistent image thing.
Right.
Why what we see is so different from device to device, even, he says, room to room. It's crazy.
It really is. And what I found fascinating about what Glencairn says is it's like we're dealing with different visual languages almost.
Yeah.
Like our devices speak in different dialects.
Okay, I kind of get that. So, like, where do we even start to decode this whole thing? Like, what's the root of the problem, according to Glencairn?
Well, he gets into the weeds a little bit with what he calls gamma pairs. I know it sounds a bit technical, but bear with me because it's actually really interesting once you wrap your head around it. Imagine, you're trying to cram all the colors of a rainbow into a box that's designed to hold only, primary colors.
Something's gotta give.
Exactly. Something's got to give. And that's essentially what's happening with our devices. They all have these limitations in terms of the range and intensity of colors they can display. So you might have a movie, right, that was graded, on a fancy P3 projector in a theater.
Right.
Those things can handle a huge GE spectrum of color.
Yeah, you want that, like, really rich cinematic experience.
Exactly. But then you take that same movie and you watch it on your, regular TV at home, which is probably using something called a Rec 709. It's like a smaller box. Less room for all those vibrant colors. So no wonder things look a little lackluster sometimes, right? The colors just can't pop the way the filmmaker intended.
So it's not just me. Sometimes the image really eye us off because of the tech itself, not because I, like, have bad taste in movies or something.
Chuckles, right? But here's the thing. Glencairn says, even if by some miracle we all had perfectly color-accurate devices, the environment that we're in totally changes how we perceive the image.
Okay, wait. You're blowing my mind a little bit here. So it's like, even if we're speaking the same language, our accents make a difference. How does the environment, like, impact things?
Okay, so think about this. You're looking at your phone screen.
Yeah.
Big difference between, being outside on a sunny day versus in a dimly lit room, right?
Oh, huge.
Yeah, our eyes adjust, but the screen itself, it can only do so much.
It's so true. Like, I know I'm constantly fiddling with my phone's brightness when I'm outside, trying to see the screen.
Right, you're basically fighting a losing battle with the sun.
Totally. And it's funny because I never really thought about it affecting how the actual image looks, just, if I could see it or not.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Glencairn points out it's not even just about the amount of light, it's the color temperature too. Like daylight's got that cooler, bluer tone, while indoor lighting's usually warmer, more yellow.
Okay, so our eyes kind of adjust to that, but the screen's stuck.
Exactly. So even with the perfect phone, you're still going to have these variations. It's like the environment is another layer of translation on top of everything else.
Okay, so I'm starting to realize this whole perfect image thing is kind of a wild goose chase then. Like, even if we had those magically consistent devices, the real world just throws a wrench in it.
It really does. And Glencairn actually lays out the ideal viewing scenario, and it's pretty intense. Controlled lighting, matched to the screen's white point, the whole shebang. Basically, a mini professional grading studio in your living room.
Yeah, not exactly practical for, like, a Netflix binge.
Not quite. So back in the real world where, our socks don't mash and our screens are all over the place, what's the big obstacle? Glencairn says a lot of it comes down to this thing called display accuracy.
Which, like, on the surface, seems pretty self-explanatory.
You'd think so, right? But it's actually pretty nuanced. It's about how closely a display hits those color and brightness standards it's supposed to meet. Like how true to life it really is.
Which sounds like a good thing, right? Don't we want that?
In theory, yes. But here's the kicker. Most people aren't walking into a store thinking about display accuracy when they buy a new TV or phone.
It's more like, ooh, Ooh, that one's bright.
Exactly. We're drawn to what's eye-catching, what pops. And manufacturers know that, so they play it up. So we end up with this kind of disconnect where the most visually appealing screen in the store might not actually be the most accurate.
So we're stuck in this visual Tower of Babel where nothing quite lines up.
You can feel that way sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some hopeful things happening. Glencairn talks about the rise of filmmaker mode on newer TVs, for example.
Filmmaker mode. I'm not sure I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's relatively new, but it's pretty cool. It's essentially a setting that tries to bypass all the artificial boosting and oversaturation that manufacturers love.
So less about like the bells and whistles and more about showing you what the actual content was supposed to look like.
Exactly. Like having a mini director's cut screening at home, potentially.
Yeah.
And the thing is, this isn't just some marketing thing. It's got some serious weight behind it. Like Scorsese, Nolan, big-time directors are backing this.
Okay, well, if it's good enough for them. So that's one thing, but then Glencairn throws another factor into the mix, and this one's a little tricky. Metadata. What in the world is that, and why should we care?
Okay, so metadata. Think of it like this. You've got a beautifully wrapped present, right? Metadata is like that little gift tag telling you what's inside, even if the wrapping paper doesn't give it away.
So it's not the image itself, it's information about the image.
Exactly. And it could be all sorts of things. The camera that was used, the settings, and crucially for our conversation, the color space it was created in.
Okay, so back to those color boxes, Rec 709 versus like the P3 you mentioned.
Precisely. Metadata is supposed to tell devices, hey, this image is coming from this box. So they know how to unpack it, so to speak.
And what happens if the gift tag is wrong?
Oh, it can be a mess. Imagine you've got an image created with, say, Rec 709, pretty standard for online videos and stuff, but the metadata mistakenly says it's Rec 2020, which is a much wider color space. Right, so your device is like, ooh, Rec 2020, got to make this super vibrant. But the image was never designed for that, so colors get blown out, the whole thing looks wrong.
It's like putting a label on a box of cookies that says gourmet chocolate chip when it's actually oatmeal raisin. Disappointing.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And it's not even just incorrect metadata. Missing information can throw things off too. Without that color space tag, a lot of systems just guess, and they might guess wrong.
So even with great devices and perfect viewing conditions, this hidden metadata can still mess everything up.
It's a sneaky little gremlin. But honestly, just being aware of it is huge. It helps explain why sometimes things just look a little off, even on a good screen.
Okay, my brain's kind of fried.
I hear ya.
We've gone from like color boxes to gift tags. It's a lot.
Yeah, Glencairn definitely takes us on a journey.
He does, but that's what makes it so interesting.
Right.
It's not just like surface level stuff. But the good news is he doesn't leave us hanging. He actually gives us like things we can do.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I appreciate most about his work. It's
Yeah.
practical.
Yes. So aside from, turning my living room into a screening room, what are some takeaways?
Well, one of his biggest things is being specific with your deliverables.
Like, what does that even mean?
So don't just create one file and assume it's going to look good everywhere. A YouTube video needs to be prepped differently than something you'd project in a theater, for example.
Ah, okay. Because those are totally different environments.
Exactly. And different platforms, different software, they all have their own quirks. QuickTime, DCP, even just uploading to Vimeo. Knowing where your work is going to end up makes a huge difference.
So less about hoping for the best and more about, like, taking control.
Exactly. And then there's the metadata gremlins we talked about. Checking and, if needed, correcting that stuff is huge.
Okay, so less trusting the computer and more like double-checking its work.
Think of it like proofreading an important email.
You don't want to accidentally send the wrong message.
Precisely. And there are tools out there that can help. He even mentions Pro Media tools for Mac users as a way to kind of wrangle those metadata settings.
Cool. So we'll link to that in the show notes for anyone who wants to check it out.
Definitely. But even if we do all that, there's still the wild card of like people's viewing environments.
Right.
We can't control everything.
So what then? We just shrug and say, hope it looks good on your end.
That's where managing expectations comes in. Glencairn is very realistic about this. Perfect consistency across the board just isn't possible.
Not everyone has a Batcave screening room in their basement.
Exactly. But there's a lot we can control.
So it's more about aiming for pretty darn good instead of technically flawless.
I think that's a great way to put it. And the really empowering thing is Glencairn gives some amazing advice for people working with like limited budgets and resources.
Okay, because not all of us are, working with Hollywood-level gear.
Right. He talks a lot about the importance of consistent lighting, for example.
Wait, so the light bulbs in my office can actually impact how my photos look?
Absolutely. It's one of those simple but often overlooked things that can make a world of difference.
Mhm.
He also talks about color-managed workflow,
Which basically means,
making sure things are consistent from start to finish. Even if your display isn't perfect, it minimizes discrepancies. And then, for the tech-savvy folks, he even touches on using scopes.
those, like, waveform things.
Exactly. Things like histograms, vector scopes. It's about learning to, really see your images beyond what your eyes might perceive at first glance.
Like leveling up your visual literacy.
Totally. You can spot potential problems early on, blown out highlights, crushed shadows, things that might not be obvious otherwise.
And fix them before it's too late.
Exactly. And all of that ties back to that idea of subtlety that Glencairn talks about. It's not always about making these huge, drastic changes. It's about the nuances, the small adjustments that can make a big difference, especially when you know most displays aren't going to be perfectly accurate anyway.
It's like instead of shouting, you're whispering, but the message still gets through.
I like that.
This has been seriously eye-opening. I feel like I need to go back and look at everything I've ever created with fresh eyes now.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
The takeaway here isn't that we need to become, obsessed with technical perfection. It's that understanding these factors gives us so much more control than we realize. We can make informed decisions.
And ultimately create better work, regardless of where it ends up.
Exactly. And, it makes you think. If something as simple as the lighting in a room can change how we experience an image, what does that say about how we experience, art in general?
It's like this whole hidden layer that most of us don't even think about.
Right. Something to ponder.
For sure. Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on today. Huge thanks to Frank Glencairn for his insights.
As always, his work is so valuable.
It is. And for everyone listening, get out there, experiment, keep learning, and most importantly, keep creating.